Before there was reality television turning family drama into a spectator sport, there was a little log cabin on the edge of Walnut Grove, Minnesota, teaching an entire generation about hard work, heartbreak, and how to survive a prairie winter. From 1974 to 1983, Little House on the Prairie ran for 9 seasons and over 200 episodes, loosely adapted from Laura Ingalls Wilder's autobiographical novels. Michael Landon led the cast as Charles Ingalls, opposite Karen Grassle as his wife Caroline. Melissa Gilbert, Melissa Sue Anderson, and twins Lindsay and Sydney Greenbush played the Ingalls daughters, while Alison Arngrim turned Nelly Olsen into one of the most delightfully hateable characters in TV history. On the surface, it was wholesome family television. Behind the cameras, though, the production was full of strange coincidences, physical hardship, hidden feuds, and trivia so odd you'd think it belonged on a different show entirely. Here are 15 facts about Little House on the Prairie that even longtime fans might not know. Stick around for number 1. It involves a melody you've heard 100 times without knowing where it really came from. In 1979, after 5 seasons of using rented space at Paramount Studios, the Little House production moved to a soundstage at MGM to build out its permanent Walnut Grove sets, the schoolhouse, the Olsen Mercantile, the Ingalls cabin interior. While tearing up the old stage flooring to lay new groundwork, crew members noticed something strange underneath. Faded yellow paint, arranged in a spiral path across the concrete. It was the actual yellow brick road built for the Wizard of Oz back in 1939, still sitting beneath the floorboards 4 decades later. Melissa Gilbert and Alison Arngrim reportedly could not resist a moment, skipping along the old road and singing Dorothy's songs while the crew looked on. Making the coincidence even stranger, the previous season had featured Ray Bolger, the original Scarecrow from the 1939 film, as a guest star playing a traveling performer, in an episode that shared its title with a famous line from The Wizard of Oz. Bolger filmed his scenes back at Paramount, so he never got to stand on the road himself, but the timing was eerie enough that cast members still bring it up decades later. When the series wrapped with the TV movie The Last Farewell in 1984, the town wasn't simply written out or left standing for reruns. It was destroyed on screen, in a finale that saw the residents of Walnut Grove dynamite their own homes, rather than hand the town over to a greedy land baron. The dramatic choice had a very practical root. The outdoor set stood on leased land at the Big Sky Ranch in Simi Valley, and the terms of the lease required the property to be restored to its original, undeveloped state once filming ended. Rather than spend weeks quietly dismantling buildings board by board, Michael Landon folded the demolition directly into the story. There's also a more personal layer to the decision. Landon had built Walnut Grove essentially from an empty field a decade earlier, personally signing off on the layout of every street and storefront to make it feel like a lived-in frontier town rather than a movie backlit. He reportedly didn't want to see his creation eventually repurposed for an unrelated shoot or a commercial, so he chose to give it a dramatic, permanent ending instead. The explosions used in the finale were real pyrotechnics, not miniatures, and by the time filming wrapped, only the church and the Ingalls house remained standing on the ranch. Cast members have described the shoot as an emotional one. Melissa Gilbert later said it felt like attending a funeral for a place she had grown up in. Actor Stan Ivar, who played John Carter in the later seasons, asked Landon if he could keep the Ingalls house structure itself, and Landon agreed. Ivar reportedly had the cabin taken apart and moved to his own property, where pieces of it are said to remain to this day. American audiences loved to hate Nelly Olsen, the spoiled, scheming antagonist of Walnut Grove. But in France, where the series aired under a different title and has been rerun constantly for decades, audiences didn't see a villain at all. They saw a star. Alison Arngrim discovered her overseas popularity somewhat by accident in the early 2000s, when fan letters written in French began showing up. On a visit to Paris, she found herself mobbed by fans who treated her less like a supporting TV actress and more like a celebrity, embracing her dramatic, unapologetic version of Nelly as the true highlight of the show. Arngrim leaned into her unexpected fame, eventually writing and performing a one-woman stage show in French built around her experience playing the character, which toured to sold-out theaters. She has since become a recognizable public figure in France, appearing in interviews, on television, and in print. With her level of fame, they're sometimes compared to how enthusiastically German audiences embrace David Hasselhoff. It's a strange twist for a character written to be despised. The mean girl of the American Prairie became something closer to a folk hero across the Atlantic. Filming took place largely outdoors at the Big Sky Ranch in Simi Valley, where summer temperatures regularly climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Unfortunately, historically accurate pioneer costuming does not exactly prioritize breathability. The female cast wore heavy wool dresses, layered petticoats, and tightly laced boots, clothing designed for a much colder climate than the Southern California summer. Karen Grassle has written about her feet essentially cooking inside her period-accurate boots during long shooting days, and Melissa Gilbert, still a child during the earlier seasons, had to wear thick stockings and multiple skirt layers regardless of the heat. The combination of restrictive clothing and extreme temperatures led to frequent fainting on set, with Alison Arngrim reportedly collapsing often enough that crew members began watching her closely whenever temperatures spiked. For a while, some crew members apparently chalked this up to a young actress simply being delicate, until a guest actor's collapse changed the conversation entirely. A teenage Sean Penn, appearing uncredited in an early episode directed by his father Leo Penn, reportedly overheated so badly during filming that he had to be pulled from set for the rest of the day. Only after that incident did the production begin taking heat safety more seriously for its performers, with better hydration breaks and monitoring becoming standard. At 5 feet 9 inches, Michael Landon was an average-sized man, but on screen as the commanding frontier patriarch Charles Ingalls, he needed to look larger than life. This wasn't new territory for him. During his years on Bonanza, Landon had played the youngest Cartwright brother alongside co-stars who towered well over 6 feet, and by his own account, he became self-conscious about being the shortest member of that cast. When he took on the lead role in Little House, he was determined not to repeat the experience. According to Alison Arngrim, Landon wore custom boots with hidden lifts built into them to add a few extra inches to his frame. He also became skilled at positioning himself advantageously on set, standing on small rises, steps, or mounds of dirt whenever a scene called for him to appear alongside taller actors, and working with camera operators to frame shots from slightly lower angles so he would visually dominate the frame. It was a subtle, ongoing effort, but it worked. On screen, Charles Ingalls reads as an imposing frontier figure, not an average-height actor doing everything he could to look taller. Michael Landon began going gray relatively young and had been dyeing his hair for years by the time Little House began filming. He preferred to color it himself using an ordinary store-bought dye rather than relying on a professional colorist. That worked reasonably well under studio lighting, but out on location in Simi Valley, the combination of intense sun, heat, and UV exposure caused his dye job to shift color over the course of a long shooting day. By afternoon, his dark brown hair sometimes took on a distinctly purplish or lavender cast, earning him the half-joking nickname, Purple Paw, among the crew. Whenever the discoloration became noticeable on camera, filming would have to pause while the makeup department scrambled to tone it down with powders and setting sprays until a proper re-dye could happen. Karen Grassle later recalled the whole situation fondly as one of the more absurd, humanizing moments behind the scenes of an otherwise very controlled production. Their stern, perfectionist leading man occasionally sporting hair the color of a lilac bush. The Ingalls family's frontier meals were meant to look simple, hearty, and entirely of the era, but the reality of filming in extreme heat, on long days, with multiple takes meant truly homemade food rarely survived the shoot. Real stews and roasts would spoil or fall apart under studio lights well before a scene wrapped, so the prop department leaned on convenient, camera-friendly substitutes. Canned beef stew reportedly stood in for rabbit, squirrel, or any other hearty brown pioneer meal the script called for, since it reheated consistently and looked identical from take to take. For scenes involving Ma's fried chicken, the production apparently didn't bother faking it at all. Buckets of actual fried chicken from a well-known fast food chain were brought to set, and Melissa Gilbert has admitted to happily eating the leftovers once filming wrapped for the day. The joke didn't go unnoticed by the writers, either. One later episode featured a traveling salesman clearly modeled after a famous fried chicken mascot, pitching a chicken franchise to Harriet Olsen, who turns him down flat. A wink from the writer's room to everyone who knew what was really on the prop table. On camera, Laura Ingalls and Nelly Olsen were bitter rivals, forever trading insults and the occasional shove into the mud. Off camera, Melissa Gilbert and Alison Arngrim were the opposite, close friends who leaned on each other to survive the demands of the production. Their bond reportedly started early, born out of shared misery. Both were teenage girls sweating through heavy wool costumes in triple-digit heat, and they found relief in making each other laugh between takes. Arngrim has described their friendship as a kind of mutual support system, a place to vent about the long hours and Michael Landon's occasionally unpredictable moods, and to talk about ordinary teenage things in between scenes of pioneer hardship. The two became known on set for playful pranks, hiding props, or trying to break each other's composure during serious takes. When Nelly eventually married Percival Dalton on the show, Arngrim and her co-star reportedly exaggerated their on-screen kisses specifically to fluster Gilbert, just for the fun of it. That closeness never really faded. Gilbert and Arngrim have continued to appear together at fan conventions and reunions for decades since the show ended, still trading behind-the-scenes stories from a friendship that started with two girls trying not to melt in wool dresses. Nelly Olsen's tight blonde ringlets were part of what made her instantly recognizable, but achieving that look was genuinely painful for Alison Arngrim. In the earliest episodes, the production tried using Arngrim's real hair, curled daily with hot irons, but her naturally straight, fine hair wouldn't hold the style, especially in the heat and dryness of outdoor filming, and repeated curling began damaging her hair and scalp. The solution was a wig, actually several wigs, since the show needed Nelly's curls to look identical episode after episode, including sturdier, stunt versions for scenes where the character got pushed into mud or otherwise messed up. The trouble was how the wigs were secured. Metal combs anchored into Arngrim's natural hair, held in place with numerous sharp bobby pins, day after day. The pressure and friction reportedly caused real scalp irritation and occasional bleeding, and Arngrim has since compared the experience to wearing a medieval torture device. As Nelly's look evolved into a bigger, more elaborate style in later seasons, Arngrim nicknamed the new wig after a popular stovetop popcorn brand, on account of its poofy shape. After Arngrim left the series, that original wig reportedly wasn't retired. It was handed down to the actress who took over as the show's new resident young antagonist. The youngest Ingalls' daughter, Carrie, was played not by one child but by identical twins, Lindsay and Sydney Greenbush, who shared the role throughout the show's run. This was a common industry workaround for strict California child labor laws limiting how many hours a young child could work each day and requiring dedicated time for schooling. By employing twins in the same costume, the production could effectively double the available filming time, swapping one girl for the other once she hit her daily limit. The twins are most famously remembered, though, for an unscripted moment in the show's opening credits. The shot of Laura, Mary, and little Carrie running down a grassy hill, where Carrie tumbles, rolls, and pops right back up smiling. That fall wasn't planned. According to the story passed down from the production, someone had accidentally put the young actress's shoes on the wrong feet just before the take, throwing off her balance as she ran and causing the stumble. Rather than cutting and reshooting, Michael Landon reportedly loved the raw, unpolished authenticity of the moment and chose to keep it in. That happy accident ended up opening nearly every episode of the show for years, and it became iconic enough to be referenced and parodied decades later on Family Guy. Michael Landon cultivated a rugged, physically confident image both on screen and off, and according to multiple accounts from castmates, that extended to skipping underwear entirely while filming in his period trousers. Landon took pride in staying fit, and often showed off his physique through shirtless farm scenes and snugly fitted costumes, leaning into a more rugged, magnetic version of the frontier dad than a purely folksy one. Karen Grassle has acknowledged in her memoir that this particular habit made certain scenes, especially close, emotional family moments, a little more awkward for his co-stars than viewers at home ever would have guessed. It's a small, strange detail, but it fits with the broader picture of Landon as someone who cared deeply about his image, both as a wholesome patriarch on screen and as a confident, somewhat rebellious figure behind the scenes. On screen, Charles and Caroline Ingalls represented an idealized version of partnership, patient, devoted, united through every hardship. Off-screen, the relationship between Michael Landon and Karen Grassle was considerably rockier. As the show became a genuine hit and Landon's compensation grew along with his expanding role as star, writer, director, and executive producer, Grassle, by her own account the emotional center of the cast, was earning significantly less. When she eventually asked Landon for a raise, the conversation reportedly did not go well. In her memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, Grassle describes Landon dismissing her request and making pointed, personal remarks in response, including references to her past struggles with alcohol that she found deeply hurtful and humiliating. The fallout lingered for years. The warmth between them largely disappeared off camera, and Grassle has described their working relationship afterward as tense and professionally difficult, particularly during scenes meant to convey closeness or affection. The story does have a resolution, though. Years later, after Landon was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, Grassle called him, and the two finally had an honest conversation after years of distance. She visited him before he passed away in 1991, and by her account, they managed to make peace with each other. If certain Little House storylines ever felt oddly familiar, that was a coincidence, because Michael Landon had written and directed a number of Bonanza episodes himself, and both shows were produced under NBC. He held creative rights to that earlier material, and he wasn't shy about reusing it. When Little House needed new story ideas, Landon sometimes returned to old Bonanza scripts, swapped out settings and character names, and adapted them for the Prairie setting. A Season 2 episode centered on a character facing an emergency amputation after a severe injury closely mirrors an earlier Bonanza episode built around the same premise. Another Little House episode about a lonely character finding unexpected love reworks a Bonanza episode with a nearly identical emotional arc, and a later season story about an underdog character echoes yet another Bonanza plot. For Landon, this wasn't laziness so much as efficiency. He knew which stories had worked before and wasn't opposed to giving them a second life in a new setting, especially in an era before reruns and streaming made such overlaps easy for audiences to catch. That sweeping, warm melody that plays over the girls running down the hill wasn't composed for Little House at all. It began life as music for a different show entirely. Composer David Rose, who scored music for both Bonanza and Little House, and later Landon's Highway to Heaven, originally wrote the tune for a 1971 Bonanza episode. In its original form, the melody was faster and bolder, built around blaring horns and driving percussion, more suited to a cattle drive or an action sequence than a tender family moment. When Landon launched Little House 3 years later, he reportedly asked Rose to rework the piece for the new series. Rose slowed the tempo, stripped out the brass, and reorchestrated it around strings and a gentle French horn solo, transforming an upbeat Western cue into the soft, nostalgic theme that opened the show for its entire run. It's a fitting piece of trivia for a series that recycled quite a bit of Bonanza material. Even its most memorable piece of music started out as something else entirely. Charles Ingalls was steady, moral, and endlessly patient. Michael Landon, by most accounts, was a far more complicated and demanding presence behind the camera. As the show's star, primary writer, frequent director, and executive producer, virtually every creative decision on Little House ran through him. Cast and crew members reportedly both admired and feared him in equal measure, describing a set that could feel intense despite the gentle, family-friendly tone of the finished episodes. According to accounts from people who work with him, Landon relied heavily on coffee, cigarettes, and sheer stubbornness to power through grueling days that regularly stretched past 12 hours, often rewriting scenes and giving line notes well after most productions would have called it a night. He was, by every account, brilliant at his job and essentially unstoppable, but that relentless pace took a real toll over the better part of a decade. Even the show's fiery, defiant ending, with Walnut Grove reduced to rubble on his own terms, reflects the same intensity he brought to the entire production. Charles Ingalls may have represented wholesome, unshakable stability, but the man who built him was working himself to the bone to keep that illusion intact, burning through the better part of a decade at a pace that, in hindsight, helped define both the show's success and its exhausting cost. And that wraps up 15 strange, surprising, and occasionally heartbreaking facts about Little House on the Prairie, a show that looked simple on the surface, but hid a genuinely wild production behind it. Which of these facts caught you most off guard? And is there a piece of Walnut Grove trivia we missed? Let us know what you think, and if you enjoyed this look behind the scenes of one of television's most beloved family dramas, stick around for more deep dives into the shows that shaped a generation.